The world of our TTRPG setting is the sum total of our memories, the stories we've witnessed, the history we've read, and the lives we've all experienced. I would be a bad storyteller to say that making content hasn't impacted the way that I perceive and create with my own worlds. And I think I'd like us to create something together. Where could you possibly start, but with the most fantasy of races? No, not the dwarves. Jury's still out on if I'll ever give them a fair shot, but instead the thousand of sub-race variant, unaging, superiority complex elves. There's a lot that can be said about elves, and we all know I can talk for an elf's lifespan if not monitored by the mutual collaborative effort between Magwife's patience with editing my audio and the respect for your time. So, as we look at various elements of Regenesis Acies, I may break topics into various parts to connect them, but not make them a Goliath pills to swallow. When I say elf, most of you will think the Legolases of the world, or maybe your free wrens. I think they've cemented themselves to be these superior, old, elegant creatures in the world of modern fantasy, having in numerous ways tossed away a lot of the folklore connections to strange fey creatures. Not to say everyone has, but I'm merely wanting to muse over the very general thoughts. Their age is a big factor, and as I've talked about in my Thesis of a Lich video, I think age is something absolutely critical to their identity, and beyond that should reflect in the characters you make. Something doesn't live thousands of years and not feel different in the world. Another key element I'd like to pay attention to is for elves is their otherworldly beauty. A lot of times, elves are almost seen as alien in a fantasy setting to common folks. Other symptoms of being an elf are, but are not limited to, a superiority complex, pointy ears, and a dotted line connection to concepts of high, dark, sun, moon, sea, or any other number of facets to the world. I don't want to spend a whole heck of a lot of time reminiscing on the basics. I think you've clicked on a video about reimagining elves. You know them well enough, and if you haven't, and I did in fact break containment, well, welcome friend. Be sure to stick around, we're only going to get more fun around here. But what does Magpie do? Let's talk about some of the basics understandings of my world so I can set some of the building blocks in, or at least some key terms. Acies is a battle world of sorts, a world constructed by an overlord figure to be ever-changing and redefined by its conflict in different eras of the world. Basically, each time I start a new setting or campaign, or have the desire to create a new TTRPG outright, I get to throw it in my junk drawer of creativity that is Acies, and we're roundabout in the 4th era of the world, and each era has begun to form its own commonality, just as this 4th current era in the world is returning to the main stage. Okay, so what terms matter in the grand scheme of things? Firstly, everlastings. They are your creatures that, in the cosmology, would be viewed as typically higher creatures than they don't really die of old age. Think vampires, dragons, giants, and yes, elves. Creation races are your people's races. Typical races your players would play as, the ones that you'd see as relatively common in society or have the ability to make, again, playable per rules as written. Your humans, dragonborns, tieflings, and oh no, it seems the elves are here too. That's odd, isn't it? To be the ancient progenitor species, but also as one of the playable homies, that's a societal element for them to try and figure out and totally not be insecure about at all. Now, the last term that I think might be particularly relevant is Digan. If you've followed me on Blue Sky for some time or heard me ramble in some of my other videos, I think you've probably heard me describe this before, but since any video can be someone's first, let me give you the TLDR. Digans are just kaiju. Not just any old D&D monster, but the really big and special ones. See, I want to challenge myself in these videos to think about why I want my world to be the way that it is, and kaiju have always been something I've loved, because superheroes and giant monsters are generally some of my favorite things. There's a few different elements to them that I find particularly interesting, one such being that they can really form and shape the worlds and societies that they're a part of. A huge point of this series' inspiration has been Crazy K's Giant series, and how much of a cornerstone he's allowed giants to be in the world he plays in and develop. And really, I want to do the same. I just wanted to give you all heads up to not get jump scared by the random giant monsters a little later in the video. Let's get this party underway. Now, one thing that has always driven me wild with elves is the fact that they might as well have Pokemon types with all their different variations. I feel like if you got too many of the same similar things that they're all just sort of a little different, it gives a lacking sense of identity. High elves, dark elves, wood elves, the Eladrin, the Shadar-kai, star elves, sea elves, winged elves, it's just too many things. I know most common breakdown is high, dark, and wood, your arrogant sons of a gun, your edgy sons of guns, and your hippie sons of guns. Easy enough, but if I was going to say I reimagined something, I wouldn't want to just take the surface level and tell you my version of the main three, so what do I use? Use none of the main three. Took moon and sun elves under my umbrella. This might just come from my liking of duality pairings and structuring society and cultures even in passive opposition, even if just aesthetically, but let me say, it's complicated. So, what if the first elves, the first ones in all of creation, weren't committed to a singular aesthetic or environmental power, but they were capable of being all of the elves? My thought is that the existence of this race, which, going forward, I will simply just refer to as Akmari, can offer a few different elements. A true progenitor to explain the modern elves, how they see themselves as everlastings, but the other everlastings see the modern concept and culture of an elf to be a creation race. The Akmari have the supernatural ability to attune to their souls and the bodies to the magical worlds and the natural forces around them. I imagine they'd have very exaggerated elven features, the whole androgynous, unknown, pointy-eared special. This isn't exactly the bounce it around and mull it over, so let me speak more definitively. Creative writing magpie, activate. At the start of creation, there was one being, the overlord of creation. He created the Diganth, and then from him were born two, Wrath and Mercy. The two live throughout all of existence, every era of the world of Acies. The two are born and reborn. They are the origin of all conflict in their existence, and from their existence, the gods were born, the crown of the world. But gods do not matter in today's story, not all of them. From the gods came the very first everlasting, but there is much contention as to the first. Vampires, dragons, treants, and giants all say they were alone at the start. The arrogance of the ancients says that they must have been the first. Regardless of whichever of the children of eternity was first, it must be known that the Akmari were among them. They were nomadic, never properly forming grandiose kingdoms or finding themselves to be content remaining in one area. They explore and adapted. This was their nature. Their bodies were able to find gills and scales when faced with the seas, thick fur and extra fat storage, and hardened bones when the cold mountains were their home. However, they didn't only reflect nature, as they found home alongside many of their fellow everlasting. They found a quick ability to conceal through the shadows and move silently with the vampires of old. The Akmari were able to take to nature with the treants, able to swiftly dance through the branches of the forest. They found homes in the dens of dragons, no matter the environment, and accompanied giants throughout their lives. The Akmari traveled the world and learned it, their bodies changing and developing. However, as they found their way, their aimlessness brought upon troubles. Their numbers became thin, so they tried to group up. They formed smaller connections and started to form collective societies and responsibilities. As much as the other children of eternity, the Akmari had a responsibility in the continuance of reality. Their lifespans were quite long. The oldest Akmari were able to understand that their age came without the harshness and burdens of age, so they wished to witness, record, and manage the needs of the Diganths of the world, the creatures that they shared the world with, but seemingly possessed power beyond that even of the gods. They began to follow migration patterns, sleep schedules, and countless other elements. They created the first of the great archives of knowledge on the Diganths, and the Akmari formed two separate kingdoms. One in the deserts, the domain of the fire elemental that was said to be the second sun when enraged, Ignafina, and the other in the realm known as Darkness, an in-between realm that crosses between hell and the prime material, as well as the prime material and the world curtain of the gods. The Akmari would hide away in darkness to study and corral the wild Diganth world cutter, and the Akmari, now far more isolationist, leaving behind their old nomadic tendencies, they settled into these kingdoms, and the age of the Akmari began to end, their natural bodies changing to the environments that they began to settle into, and from the sunny sands of the great Nerau desert were born the Shahar, known to the larger world as Sunel, and to the in-between world of darkness were born the Leilen, known as Munel. The Shahar brought themselves into the desert alongside the great Leviathan River, where the first great old of the Diganth was slain and sealed away into the grounds of Acies. The magically rich and present river was greatly defined their society and allowed them to endure the heat of the Diganth who claimed the territory of Leviathan once they were sealed away. The second son, Ignafina, was what the Shahar were studying, and they sought to seek out if the Diganths could be controlled. Intense fire would be able to have boundless energy, able to manipulate the raw magical energy to be able to see themselves atop the other children of eternity. The Shahar, much like any other everlasting, would want to see themselves at the top, closest to the gods, and if the power of the Diganths can be controlled, that would be the route to their ascension. The Shahar built their cities out of sturdy bricks and built them down into the sands to allow for cooler abodes, the sweltering heat of Ignafina bringing a lot of obstacles to daily living, but they find their ways to survive. The natural adaptation of their body began to insulate against the heat. Their skins turned to texture that would be able to help no longer absorb such intense light and heat of their environments. They then ensured that their garb and accessories were thin and white in order to reflect such heat and light. The vast libraries recording the patterns and informations on the Diganths were safely buried in the sand tombs that were eventually sealed away to only be available to the Council's oldest Shahar and Archons of the kingdom. Additionally, the laboratories and arcane studies that were aiming to properly utilize the Diganth Ignafina as an energy source for destruction would reach high into the sky, powerful obelisks aiming to operate as watchtowers, as well as groundings to absorb the magical heat and energy. The Shahar would study and grow, learning in the countless days in the world of Acies. But what happens when such creatures' adaptations for eternal life grows old? Well, the Shahar absorbs the heat and the light of the sun. Much like the great trees of other lands, the lands far away from Ignafina, an older Shahar will become less lively and passive in the days and years to be far more meditation focused. The mind focusing on harnessing the wisdom learned by living around and learning from the world truths of these ancient and powerful creatures. They would slow themselves, sharpening their mental prowess and many abilities. Now, if the Shahar were who went to the sands to study the power of the Diganths, what happened to the Akmari that went to darkness to ensure the Diganths of the in-between didn't break through to destroy the lands of Acies? This is the story of the Leilen, known more commonly in the world of Acies as Moon Elves. The Elves of Darkness made their way into the strange realm to monitor the monsters that called this place home. As the first group of Leylens made their way into the unfamiliar and hostile lands that few other everlasting had ever bothered to try and conquer or explore, they found the strange, beautiful lands to be dangers, and they struggled to survive. But their eyes adapted to ensure sight unlike they'd ever had. Their bodies took on the ability for camouflage, not outright invisibility, but as much as a chameleon-like effect in low lighting. This allowed them much better chance of becoming an organized ambush predator in the realm of darkness. They became far more of a warrior culture than their Shahar and siblings. As the tribes of the Leilen grew in skill and organization, their biggest threat, the Diganth World Cutter, a colossal insect-like creature that spawns many of the living nightmares that tear and feast throughout darkness. The Leilen would spend most of their years corralling the beast, learning its diet, migration patterns, the rate in which it created offsprings. The Leilen weren't powerful enough to slay World Cutter, and they were quite aware that the beast had a unique role in the continuation of the world. World Cutter migrated and moved throughout the realm of darkness and used its pincers and unique magical abilities to stitch the realms of Acies and darkness from bleeding into one another. However, the leadership of the Leilen saw this land as their pride, and they wouldn't flee back to the realm of Acies. They wanted to ensure that they could make this their whole, establishing their place as the superior children of eternity. This hardship and challenge made the Leilen powerful, but their natural isolationist meant that they didn't have companionship or alliance. This meant that whenever a Shaharan king came to the world of darkness seeking to control the dark powers with a cursed and controlled Ignafina, the Leilen tribes and Worldcutter and its spawn both found themselves on the brink of extinction. However, a fateful battle between the invading Sun King, causing a battle in process between Leilen attack force and a group of Worldcutter spawn, the two found that they were independently strong, but when the spawn found biological compatibility of their natural form to bind with the Leilen, they found a strength beyond any measure. The union between the spawn of Worldcutter and the Leilen allowed them to fight back for the ownership of the Realm of Darkness. Their culture changed to no longer be battling and containing Worldcutter, but instead finding the symbiotic growth that could be happening, and they thrived. Their numbers decreased due to the invasion, but now they had security and growth, but above all else, they had the dominance of the Realm of Darkness, as no other monsters that dwelled could threaten this united force. The creatures of Worldcutter bonded for life once they secured themselves to a life form. This union in many ways is a close connection as one might find in direct family or a marriage. It made two separate life forms become one. Their lifestyle was still largely that of combat, training, growing, and hunting throughout the Realm of Darkness, not merely for the need to conquer or slay, but to ensure security of their lands to remain their own. And with the forces of the Leylens and Worldcutter spawns combined, there was not many that would even begin to think of imposing upon the Realm of Darkness. When the power and the skill of the Leilen people began to be known to the greater world of Acies, emissaries would be sent to the Realm of Darkness, with offers to request them as mercenaries or assassins, which, while countless offers were declined, the fair number that fell to temptation and traveled across the plains to seek gold for blood began to inform a greater deal of superstitions about Leilen culture, to those who would never have traveled to or known darkness. However, those would not do justice to the clans within darkness. The Leilen people are powerful warriors, but they enjoy dancing and moving with the currents of the deep rivers within darkness that are moved and manipulated by the eternal red moon of the realm. They have a powerful honor code bound in their battle families and war codes. This allows the few who do not die on the battlefield to find themselves finding a much different transformation than their Shahar brothers and sisters. For the Leilen made an eternal pact with Worldcutter, and they didn't grow weary and low energy. Instead, their power and size is mass, becoming large creatures of battle. Perhaps a bit slower than their younger forms, but some of the oldest have been said to give stone giants someone to look eye to eye with. They are bound to the spawn of the Diganth, so truly who knows the upper limits to these children of eternity? And scene, right? Let's talk a bit about the Shahar and the Leilen, and why I made some of the choices that I did. Firstly, I tend to think of the numerous options of elves within the typical capacity of D&D as a bit excessive. I tend to feel the same way about the numerous dwarves or any other race that might have different Pokemon types as aforementioned. But I think there's something interesting about the progenitor race being able to adapt. I think that's something that really spoke to me. Oftentimes in fantasy, the ranger can often be seen as an elf of some sort, and rangers can come in any and all different types of terrains, and even a ranger who is out of their element needs only a bit of time to adapt, using their keen perception to handle whatever comes their way. That's why I started out with the Akmari. I think a lot of ways they're going to be that one extinct race that gets alluded to and totally won't ever come up as still secretly having been around by any means. However, if I'm going to have an extinction event, or even the non-existence of an everlasting, I'd really want to make it something unique and not just tag it in here. So that's why I had the Akmari evolve into two unique groups, both with the desire to deal with Diganths in some form or fashion. I tend to really like the symbolism of pairs or groups. That's why evident in my creation story with Wrath and Mercy, and in ways I think I can further support these themes by allowing the developments of the Akmari to comment on another division of two that can cause friction, but also show that cultures are often misunderstood or can indirectly be shaped and transformed by one rotten individual. I didn't go into the eras and rulers of both, as frankly, if you want me to do a video about world building a history for a kingdom or culture, I'd like that to be a more focused topic. If that's what you want, please let me know in the comments below. The history of my elves has the Sun Elves initially going to the Narav plow desert to learn and study the Digants, record massive libraries to understand these beings of such power and importance. However, in a generation or few, we have our typical plot that comes up whenever we start discussing giant monsters. What if we controlled them or harnessed them? And just like every time mind control gets brought up in a Godzilla movie, it'll backfire here too. But we see those who want to learn become those who want to take and control, and the opposite is seen with the Leilen. They were the Akmari that traveled to the Shadow Realm in order to keep those monsters at bay. They were still learning, but they were far more ready for conflict, ready to slay and destroy to keep the realm of Acies safe. Through their trials, tribulations, and eventual calamity of Ignafina being brought into darkness to try and destroy and conquer, they found themselves a union and were able to survive and establish themselves more as a warrior culture who sought to keep a more peaceful setting, no longer living to survive but fighting to live. I really liked what I came up with for both of these elves and how they age, because I think elves getting old and staying pretty is a tidbit boring for me personally. I think it's worth looking at the natural world and seeing what we see. Two inspiration points being trees, no tree in particular, the natural world's ability to really grow roots and sort of carry on for decades, century, and even in some instances a few millennia. And while our other example doesn't stack up in the timeline, the Greenland sharks being able to live for hundreds of years and just sort of getting bigger and a bit slower is also pretty cool to me. Brings me the kind of inspiration. One kind of elf can become more meditation and wisdom focus, and the other becomes a slow, bigger, monstrous. I don't know, between Lich's Dragons and now, I think I've talked a good bit about wanting to ensure that immortality and a sense of agelessness is a unique experience for each different creature. Both the elves also get to kick off this next phase of Reimagined in a way that I want to challenge myself in really making the Digants a fixture of the world. They need to impact and change the culture of the creation races and the Everlastings, the Akmari being the first of the Everlastings to really start wanting to learn about the Digants. It gives me a good place to start building their foundation. Ignafina and Worldcutter are actually the first Digants that I've named outside of Taishin, if you recall our Aberrations Reimagined video, but I plan on eventually having them all named, designed, and really committing to a world document of sorts, but it all has to start somewhere. There's a few elements of the Shahar and Leilen that I haven't gone into because, well, I intentionally omitted them because I want the creation process or discussion to be available for other videos at a later point, such as creating the unique, powerful figures that have helped in critical moments of history, the religions of both cultures. But with that, I think we're getting to a really nice closing point. Again, I want to take a minute and really shout out Crazy K, whose Giant series really inspired me. I guess share my creations while I talk about some of the tropes and elements and the fundamentals of fantasy TTRPG stuff. If there's anything in particular you'd like me to tackle next, please let me know. There's a lot of ways and angles I can go from here. I could talk about the orcs who were made as warrior Akmari during a near end of the world event, or perhaps the vampires, which exist in two ways similar to elves, and have a close biological connection to elves. But with that, I really have to drive this to a conclusion. It's been a while since we talked, and I'm happy this could be creative in general. So, until next time, my dear adventurers, stay safe out there, and remember, always, magpie responsibly. Thanks, and thanks again.